Right. Hello, Brown Pundit is honoured to be in conversation with Ani Zonneveld, who is a female imam based in California. She is a writer, founder, and president of Muslims for Progressive Values, MPV, an international human rights organisation that advocates for social justice and equality for all. A strong supporter for freedom of expression and conscious women's rights and LGBTQ rights. Ani promotes these values at the United Nations by challenging rights abuses in the name of Islam and by offering an inclusive understanding based on the values of Islam. Her exposure to different politics, religion, and cultures has shaped her inclusive worldview. Ani is also a Grammy certified songwriter and singer. So Ani, welcome. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Thank you.
So I'm really looking forward to having a really relaxed conversation and debunking lots of stereotypes that people have and lots of conversations I've had with friends about discussing and having a conversation with a female imam.
Yes. Yes.
So
it does make people trip up in a positive and in a negative way. Yeah.
So that's what I'm hoping this interview, we can maybe start off with, oh, hi, Makanda, you are here.
I am here. Happy. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Excellent.
Thanks for setting this up. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I'm here to support.
So I thought we'd just start off with your journey as a imam, and how did that start, and what inspired you, and what was your purpose when you started out?
Yeah, it wasn't my intention to become a female imam. I kind of fell into it. But I will, what is really sort of funny how life takes you on this path and you journey on, as long as you journey on with an open heart and then journey on being in tune with your gut feeling and, you know, what God has to offer you or the universe has to offer you, right? So sometimes we're so on our path and we have these blinders on and we don't pay attention to the doors that open for you, for example. But I just wanted to start a community that was inclusive, and in some ways, well, as a transplant from Malaysia, I don't have family here, and what's around me is very conservative, and I was putting out an Islamic pop CD, and it was shunned because I was a female singing voice, and therefore that's haram, which was such an appalling interpretation of Islam. And also very wrong because we've always had female performers, singers, teachers. I mean, the first teachers were women, you know, come on already, right? So, and then you had this justification that, oh, because I use all the musical instrumentation, that is also haram because Prophet Muhammad only used the percussion. So if you look at some of the nasheed that was coming up from, you know, our communities, the Muslim community, you will notice that at least 15, 20 years ago, all you heard were male voices and percussion, right? No musical instrumentation. But that started changing after 2004, 2005. So I didn't realize what I did was basically walking into some landmine, Muslim landmines. And, you know, just hearing this sort of response was so absurd for me because I'm born and raised Muslim and I've never heard of this interpretation of Islam. And this is a new Islam, by the way. This is not the real deal. So that also riled me up. And, you know, it was post 9/11 and I had restudied Islam for myself. And Amina Wadud had conducted that very public prayer service in New York where she led men and women in prayer. And at that point, I was completely unshackled by the social construct of what Islam is, or the patriarchal and tribal interpretation of what Islam is, and went back to the roots of what Islam is, which is very pure. And so that's how I started. I just wanted to create a community for myself. And the community just, why don't you just lead prayer since you know all this, you know? So that's how that really happened. It wasn't my ambition. Oh, I'm creating a community because I want to be an imam. That is not the intention, the niyat, or my motivation. Actually, what I call myself is the imam with a small I, because I don't subscribe to the religious hierarchy. I feel that everyone has the religious duty and spiritual equality. And so therefore everyone should have the responsibility, if they want to step up and lead prayer, do the khutbah, or whatever it is that they want to take a role on in the religious spiritual sphere. So that's my philosophy of religious leadership, duty, and being a teacher. That's what I see myself as, being a teacher.
What do you think like's been the biggest challenge you've had to overcome? I mean, the term progressive, I just feel our community fears it. Even friends my age, the term progressive, you know, not so much with the girls, but I found with my male friends, they're quite fearful of it, even in my age.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with not knowing what it means, right? I mean, at the heart of it, Islam is progressive. For 1400 years ago, it was revolutionary in what it was advocating for. And so I don't understand the fear. And what it tells me is that people don't know their Islam. And what it tells me is that they are so entrenched in the dogma, in the patriarchal and tribal interpretation of Islam. And we intentionally called ourselves progressive as a way to identify our values. And it is rebuilding our progressive Islam movement. It is rebuilding, not building. It is, or building a new Islam. No, it's rebuilding where Islam left off, where Prophet Muhammad left off after he died. Because after he died, it went back to patriarchy, it went back to pre-Islam mindset structures. And for the life span where he was a prophet, he was undermining the patriarchy and the tribalism, and advocating for women's rights and human rights in general.
It was really revolutionary, wasn't it? Yes, for that time, in comparison to the West.
And even until today, in some aspects, it's still revolutionary, right? So let's talk about, the treatment of animals, for example. We slaughter animals in the most cruel way right now. And when the intention of the Quran and the Hadith and how he was with animals was basically kindness. And it's very clear that if you're going to slaughter an animal, you can't have the animal know it's going to be slaughtered, and that its fellow kinship is not going to hear the wailing of the animal. And here we are. Oh my gosh, we are so cruel. The most cruel. The only Muslim country that I know that is kind to animal is Turkey. I don't know any other Muslim country that is kind to animal. They beat the crap out of their donkeys, kick the dogs, so we're so off, even the way we treat human beings, right? But, okay, I'm talking about animals, but our whole philosophy about what Islam is in the Muslim world is so distorted and bastardized. And that is why the Muslim world is in the shape that it is. Because we are
dehumanized.
Morally
if we look at Palestine, I remember having a conversation with one of my friends, and he says, why do we have to have a female mum, and why are we focusing on these progressive issues when we have things like Palestine going on, China? And I said they're all interlinked, because people don't associate compassion with Islam. They don't associate human rights with Islam. So these are focuses that we have to recalibrate ourselves. And it is a bit of a PR, and even for ourselves, because we learn the Quran, rote learn. I mean, I've learned it, but I don't understand the meaning. Unless you understand the meaning and we have that recalibration in our society, it's not embedding those core values, or we're not linking those together.
Exactly. The amount of violence in Muslim societies justified in the name of Islam is remarkable. It's remarkable in the terrible way, obviously. And it is that cycle of violence that really has harmed our society, and how it's groomed the next generation to also be discriminating and violent and non-compassionate, and it's really sad, because every opening of the pastor's scene, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Rahim, in the name of God, the most gracious, the merciful. And if you look at the root word of Rahim, it means it's womb, the part of the woman's body where it is the most nurturing and protective environment for a baby, right? And God is describing itself as that nurturing, and saying that as a way for us human beings to be as loving, merciful, and as nurturing. And that is not what we are as Muslims. And that's the sort of recalibration that you're talking about, or assessing what is the core of our values, and the core of how we behave and how we carry ourselves, and how, our language and how we treat each other. That's what's really missing. And when you don't have that, that's where moral corruption is rampant, and it's rampant, and it's rampant at the level of the religious institutions. It's rampant at the level of religious leadership, and that's why the Muslim population is also rife with this moral corruption.
We don't have that figurehead. I mean, I was like Mukunda, we speak a lot about Hinduism, and it's quite holistic, isn't it? But it works as a community, and we don't, even though we don't have that structure, like I'm in the UK, we don't have that one pinnacle leader. We have these institutions that are quite unprofessional as well, especially towards women. I had a friend of mine who went to see a Sharia court, and her husband's an adulterer, and he turned around and said to her, "What have you done?" And this was only a couple of weeks ago. And he's our professional. And I asked her, "You don't mind me saying this?" She said, "Yes, because we have to." But does that mean we take ownership? Do we have to get involved? And that's what you've done, isn't it? You've taken ownership, gotten involved, opened the doors up for other people. Because I think people just see it as progressiveness. It's an attack on Islam from the West. Because I read a lot of articles about, female imams, and it was like, it's a clash of civilizations, a Eurocentric approach to Islam.
It's such a cop-out. It's such a cop-out. It's such a lie. It's such a cop-out. It's lazy. It's in what I call intellectual laziness, right? So it's very interesting that the first female imam was appointed by Prophet Muhammad himself, right? So give me a break. And so, but what is very interesting is that we were never taught that, were we?
No.
And so that's a very convenient omission of very important facts about how egalitarian Prophet Muhammad was. And so, we are taught this very tribal, patriarchal interpretation of Islam, like Muslim women cannot marry non-Muslim men. Like that is an outright lie. And there's a whole tribal interpretation from which we are still living this, right? And so the challenge is what we are doing for myself. I'll speak for myself, and the movement that we've created is really challenging the male authority, and that really is discomforting. And it's challenging not to say that we're going to take over, because that's not the agenda. We just want equality. We're not trying to, because I would be completely against a matriarchy system as well.
Yeah.
So, we just want equality and egalitarian and inclusivity for men, women, LGBT, and everything in between. And we're not here to take over the male authority. That's not the intent. Just give us what's due. We are spiritual equally. We are equally spiritual. And the root of this problem is the hadith. Okay. So the Quran is full of texts about men and women, this and men and women, that, this whole verse about the responsibility of men and women, good deeds, whatever, it's equal. And then you go to the hadith, and the hadith is a total bastardization of the Quran, most of it. So when Amina Wadud did her Friday prayer, there was a whole uproar in the Muslim community here in the United States. And so what I did with a colleague of mine, we organized a public forum with a scholar of Islam, Professor Khalid Abdul Fadl, and to discuss the legal permissibility or impermissibility of such a prayer. And he spent 10 minutes on the Quran and basically saying there's no prohibition. And he spent 2 hours on the hadith where the prohibition came about, right? And so, another 10 minutes on the positive outline of why it's permissible, and like 2 hours on impermissibility. And he told us that there's a passage there's a context in the hadith where the spirit, the soul of the woman is equated to that of an ass. And that's why you cannot pray behind a woman, because your prayers are not going to be accepted by Allah. This is how absurd this hadith is. And this is the sort of mentality of how we women are spiritual inferior to men. And that's why domestic violence is justifiable. And that is why your path as a woman to heaven is obedience to the husband. All this nonsense has nothing to do with the Quran, but is all about patriarchy and how that was justified in the hadith.
And it's true, because when you have these discussions, and my friends listening will tell me in iCircle, I have these discussions, and it always becomes heated, and it shouldn't be, because I mean, just looking at objectively, if we have a book that's quite subjective, maybe it was meant to be subjective. Are we saying there's flaws in it? And then what is wrong? I was talking to my friends about Sharia law, and I said to him, but why can't we question Sharia law? Why is that blasphemy? It's rules, it's regulations. Why can't we question who designs this? And people, and he's, some of them are lawyers, barristers, they don't want to discuss. Why do you think that is?
People don't even know what Sharia law is, because we have been told Sharia law is God's law. Bogus. It is actually 100% man-made construct. If you go back to Prophet Muhammad's community and to Prophet Muhammad himself and says, can you explain what Sharia law is to me? He's going to look at you, and everyone around is like, what are you talking about? Right? It is not Quranic based. How can it be Quranic if it contradicts the Quran? How can it be God's law if it contradicts the Quran, which is supposed to be God's words? I mean, ask yourself that and be intellectually honest about it, right? I mean, it's really that simple.
Argue there's strong hadiths and weak hadiths. And we're thinking, we've had all this time to work out what's strong and what's weak. So then it's subjective again, and it's what narrative that you choose to take. But most of the time, it is women that suffer as a consequence. I don't see any rule that I can think men, I don't know if you know, suffer from as a consequence.
Yeah, no, exactly. And the problem is, again, our religious teachers. And they have lied to us. They have not taught to us what Sharia is and what Sharia law is. Those are two very different concepts. And what they've done intentionally is to conflate the two terms. The two terms are completely different in meaning. Sharia is basically, in the Quran, the watering hole that quenches your spiritual thirst. It is so beautiful. It is a set of guidelines. And that's all there is to it. Sharia law is a human construct. And so over the centuries, you have religious and political leaders, and the politicians are awfully violent, and people don't want to admit that. Muslims don't want to admit it. But if you read the history of Mecca, if you read the history, it is incredibly brutal how they butchered each other to take control of Mecca. And there's a story behind that. I'll share that in a minute. But so basically what would happen is that over the centuries, you have the religious leaders. This is after Prophet Muhammad has passed away, obviously, and everyone wanted to control their constituency. They wanted to expand their boundaries. And so what they would do is that the politicians of the day would extrapolate from the Quran their understanding of the Quran. Now, if you're medieval, misogynistic, and a brutal dictator, you're going to take whatever you extrapolate from it, because after all, we're all human beings, and the Quran is vague enough that, how you read the Quran is based on your values and your prism, your wisdom. And this political leader would mesh it up, to use a modern term, with the social construct of the day. So, women and girls are property. Child forced marriage is permissible. That misogynistic stuff, right? Which is not in the Quran. is actually against the Quran, which the Quran was revealed to undermine, right? And yet it becomes part of something called the Sharia law. And then it was signed off by the religious leaders that are paid by the politicians, right? And so here you have Sharia law. And then over the century, you will see Sharia law is a little bit different from one country to another. Sharia law in Saudi Arabia is different. Sharia law in Malaysia is different. As a matter of fact, Sharia law in Malaysia changes over time. And I'm challenging my sister. Oh, wait a minute. Did God come down to the Sharia court and say, oh, now men can marry in a polygamous and they don't need permission from their first wife? Whereas 10 years ago, they needed permission. I mean, come on. People think, you need to think and think critically. And this nonsense of Sharia law being God's law, that's a facade in order for the leaders, the religious leaders, the politicians of the day to control the constituency. And that's all there is to it, and particularly women. And it all comes from patriarchy.
It's a society prism, isn't it? That it's across all cultures, the West, that people are losing their critical thinking, and you've got the thought police out. We always discuss it, Mukunda, on our group. So it's as if people become quite dogmatic about things and you can't discuss it. So many of my girlfriends were saying, yeah, but you know what I do, Shahada? If it doesn't make sense in the Quran, I just ignore it. But why can't we vocalize that? Because unless we vocalize it, with people like you, Annie, vocalizing it, we're not going to have those discussions, that our daughters will still have the same problem, and our sons as well, because there'll be that clash, and there isn't actually that clash.
So one of the mandates in the Quran as a Muslim is to think critically. And so the fact that we're not thinking critically makes you less of a Muslim, according to the Quran, not according to me. So the Quran is dictating you to question, dictating you to ask and challenge yourself when you are reading the Quran. I mean, this is a very secure God who that wrote this book, right? So I think Muslims need to get out of their insecurity and need to take the example from the words of the Quran itself to challenge. The Quran is challenging you, so why can't you challenge yourself, right?
It's even with the case of LGBT, right? One of my friends, a BBC journalist, and she interviewed imams on it. And one of the imams said to her, if we were to put a hierarchy of sin, slander would be higher than somebody who's gay. But we don't have those conversations. And when I have those conversations with my friends, they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, that is the case.
So Shahada, so these imams are very good at having this very public outward, statements like that. But internally, okay, what have you talked about this? When have you preached about this? And, so this is the problem that I have with a lot of religious leaders. What they teach internally inward is very different than what they say outward. And what they say outward is more accurate to what Islam really is. Islam, as in the Quran, is. When you talk about women's rights, and, all these imams will always say, oh, Islam is about women's rights. Like, yeah, bloke, how are you teaching it internally, right? It's so dishonest. And even on the issue of religious freedom, the freedom to believe or not, right? Within the Muslim community, God forbid if you decide to leave Islam. Yeah. And, but in actuality, you have total right to do that according to the Quran, with no earthly punishment, because at the end of the day, it's between you and God. And the fact that in many of the just about every Muslim country has punishment, some level of punishment for leaving Islam, where it's by death, as in Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Pakistan, or in Malaysia, where you will be sent to a rehab center and fined until you give up on the idea of converting out of Islam, right? So this is not religious freedom. Islam is really about religious freedom, and it at the core of it, because the reason that it is about religious freedom is because you as an individual are responsible for your own deeds, or good deeds and bad deeds, right? And so And so in order for you to be judged at the end of the day for your good or bad deeds is for you to have the human capacity and the ability to make that decision for a good or a bad deed. And that's how you can be judged. But the problem is that the authorities have usurped God's judgment, and they have decided they're going to decide who's a good Muslim and who's a bad Muslim. And that is controlling your ethics, controlling your right to think, controlling your right to believe or not, controlling. And if you controlled that way, then you are not a human being. And if you're not a human being, then how actually do you connect with to the you that God has created you to be? Right.
So connect with the love, because when you hear the stories of the Prophet, the seerah, they're all so beautiful, and people converted because of his character and his kindness. But then you think that doesn't apply to modern times, and we've forgotten that. And I think, like you said, historically, because I remember talking to my son about this, and he went, "Oh, Mum, but Islam grew after." And I said, "Yes, but look at the method that it's grown. And we have to also, we've forgotten the compassion and the love and the empathy, and it's become dutiful. But then you don't grow as an individual unless you project that as well."
Oh, that's right.
And I think we've kind of lost that.
Yeah, oh, we've totally lost that.
And then people have lost that towards us as well, because we've been dehumanized as a consequence.
I want to go back to a little bit to this accusation that it is a Western construct. That is so lame, because I'm sorry, Islam and the Quran gave women a lot more rights than any civilization at that time. So give me a bloody break and go study your real Islam first. And to say that it is a clash of civilization goes to show how these particular Muslims that you're talking to have totally bought into the divide and conquer, the clash of civilization narrative, which is intentionally designed to demonize and to belittle the Muslim civilization and the spiritual and cultural importance of Islam back in the days and how it's influenced the Western world. And so, you know, these type of conservative Muslims, they can't have it both ways. They talk a lot about, oh, the golden age of Islam, where there was a lot of religious liberties, a lot of development and science and arts and, you know, just incredible. Where did that come from? That did not come from an environment where you were intellectually controlled. That came from an environment where you were intellectually liberated to think and express, and where Jewish scientists or doctors were the doctors to the rulers, for example, right? So I think that these type of conservative Muslims that use this trope, they are, and that's just that. There's just this dishonest intellectual, they're intellectually dishonest, and they're really not interested of getting to the heart of Islam. And as far as I'm concerned, they are the reason why Islam is so misunderstood. And they are the cause why Muslims in the West are so dehumanized and disrespected, as you are not equal to us. And you are a second-class citizen because your values are not democratic. So I blame the conservative Muslims for this.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because I've had this conversation with so many people, and I think it also stems from, we need more feminine input as well, because that is our feminine spirit. And if we don't import that, we're going to end up with brutalization. And that's what it is. And ruthlessness, and admiring ruthlessness. I remember having a conversation with a friend about Modi, and he went, "But Shahada, Muslims supported Saddam Hussein. He was ruthless." And it's true, it crosses all cultures, doesn't it? And if we're going to go for that ruthlessness and forgetting, I can't remember any stories where Prophet ﷺ was ruthless or brutal. And all the stories were beautiful. And when you hear them, we don't hear them enough. So what do you feel like, what was the most, so did you grow up with all these stories anyway, or did you read around after, September? How did you get to the point where you really researched?
It was after 9/11 where I really reassess, okay, if I'm a Muslim, then what kind of Muslim am I? And, the 9/11 perpetrators, I was like, what the hell is this about? I was like, how can you do this? This is so un-Islamic, And so I had to reanalyze for myself, because I was also a closeted Muslim, because I was in the music business for 25 years. And I was very private about my Muslim identity. And I realized that after 9/11, it's like, okay, I have to make a decision. So if I'm going to come out of the closet, I need to really know what my Islam is. And so I decided to restudy Islam. But I also had a niyat before embarking on this learning journey. I said, Ya Allah, if I leave Islam as a result of this, then so be it. If I come closer to Islam as a result of it, then so be it. And that was my niyat. And I just, delved in with a very open heart and open mind. And so what I discovered was I fell in love with Islam. And that was kind of like the fire that has, the fire in the belly, as they say, and how that has really energized me. And that fire in the belly is still here 20 years later. So going strong.
Love, because you radiate that, because we had a conversation before. And anything, when it stems from love and you hear the stories of the Prophet, it's about love. And you know what? It's a simple concept, but I think for some people, it's a complicated concept. It's a bit narcissistic, if you see what I mean, for some leaders, and they don't understand that. And the concept that your amazing, rights for FGM and for women's rights. Like, I always have conversations with people about that, but I wanted to hear your views on that. Is it representative Islam? We say no, it's not representative, it's culture. But how much do we as a community really oppose it as well and challenge that narrative?
Yeah. So when it comes to FGM, female genital mutilation and cutting, it is a prehistoric. It's an old tradition that preceded Islam even. So, but what is very convenient, obviously, is that in order to control women's sexuality, hey, let's use Islam, or let's use Christianity, or let's use whatever it is, religious sacred texts, in order to justify. And that's the problem with religion. It is so powerful that religion is such a strong influencer in our practices, in our culture, in our language, in our food. It has a strong influence. And so if the religion is being used to justify FGM, to justify child marriage even, then, you have to address the religious context, which justifies these harmful practices that has nothing to do with Islam. And so there was a conference about, I forget how many years ago. It was organized by a German couple in partnership with Al-Azhar University. So this German a man went to, I don't know how he got to Al-Azhar University, and basically went to the dean there, says like, that FGM has nothing to do with Islam. Can you make a statement from Al-Azhar University, the Sunni Institute, to really once and for all condemn this as a non-Islamic practice, un-Islamic practice? And the Al-Azhar dean said, you organize it, I'll give you the space. And that actually really happened. And so I actually have a book behind me. It's called The Green Book, and it's in English, Arabic, and French. And it's written, it's a collection of writing and position papers by all the religious leaders and prominent religious leaders and scholars of Islam for all the different madhabs to condemn FGM as being un-Islamic, period. That should really put an end to it, right? You would think.
Yeah.
But it's still a struggle in the Muslim world. But what is really good is that you see women activists in the villages, etc., now bringing on and challenging religious leaders to say, where does it say in the Quran that FGM is Islam? Right? And there's actually a beautiful documentary out about this actual journey of a particular imam. It says, give me a month and I'll come back and I'll point it out to you. So he comes back a month later and basically tells this woman, like, there is no justification for it. And he basically then become an advocate to abolish the practice of FGM in his village. So, but those are the kind of imams that I work with. I don't work with those high flying TV, money making imams.
We know
That's
who
all
they
it
are.
is. Huh?
We know who they are.
Yes, exactly. I work with those really genuine imams that are really rooted in and connected with their community. Those are your village imams that really have the interest of genuine interest, and they're honest and they're not corrupt. And if you talk to them in a rational and respectful way, you can win them over, because it is going back to the roots of Islam. But if some of these imams were educated in Saudi Arabia, so they come back with that corrupt Wahhabi mentality. But some of these imams are educated locally or in Tanzania or in Sudan, where it's more Sufi, right? So they have a very different perspective of Islam as well. So, but the best way, I mean, the work that I do is frame in what I call the Islamic human rights language. And that is what I've coined, and that's the work that we've been doing for 15 years, is how do we affirm human rights in the Islamic language? Because it's there, right? And so how can anyone argue with that? A Muslim argue with that? Right. And so if a Muslim is honest, intellectually honest and sincere, ikhlas, they will come around. And I've seen that come around. Now in DRC, Burundi, Rwanda, we work there. I've been working there for almost 5 years in Burundi and other places. We have a network of 150, what we call imams for she champions. And these are male imams who on a weekly basis or a monthly basis give khutbahs affirming women and girls' rights in their mosques, right? And that's the sort of cultural change that's the cultural change that needs to happen, which again, like I said, is heavily influenced by religion. So your religion needs to be right. It needs to come from the right place of love and compassion for society to excel, to be lifted up. Islam is liberating, but that's not how we were taught. We were taught to we're put in this really bloody small box, or to be a Muslim, a good Muslim, you have to be fit into this small box. So that's not what Islam is. Totally unshackled us for all of that. Yeah.
And I like the fact you focus on that anti-hate speech, because we don't do that enough. With people like we have, I remember years ago having a conversation with my dad about the amazing Zakir Knight. And my dad was like, oh, he's amazing, he's challenging. I said, no, it's his ego, Dad. That's what he's doing. He's an ego. He's found a way to capture all these egotistical men and think, look at me, I'm amazing with my knowledge. But is that something we really want to be aspiring to? None of our prophets were like that. Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam wasn't like that. But how have we become? It's become quite evangelical, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
In
totally.
that approach, isn't it? So in one way, they oppose progressiveness. Yet Zakir Knight, sitting there with a suit and a little bow tie, he's perfectly acceptable. So again, it's that male narrative, isn't it, that's coming across. So, what sort of challenges can you give us some examples of some challenges you've had with Imam? That I remember you told me a story, when we spoke last, about how you changed people's perception of you. I think when you were at a conference and the way you spoke and someone came up to you at the end of the conference.
Yeah. I was at the State Department, and this was during President Trump's day, and it was a conference on religious freedom. And so there were people from all over the world. Is that the story I shared with you?
Yeah. That was
okay. I shared with quite a few things. So, and then, and there was a panel, and it was led by this woman who was, from the Christian right, and slamming, some aspect of Islam and so forth. And I pushed back. I actually forget the details now, but I pushed back really hard. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, that's not Islam. This is, just correcting her. And, I don't wear hijab, and I wear my, dress pants and blouse, and I do not look Muslim, right? So after that, a whole bunch of the very conservative Muslim men there was one imam that was the president of from India, who was the head of an umbrella organization of imams of 100,000 imams or something. And, he came and he shook my hand, and others did too. And I was thanking me for pushing back the way that I did, because, the Muslims, have this interesting thing, and which I think is very beautiful. And that is, they don't challenge the host out of, they don't want to be rude. It's, adab, right? But as an American, I was like, hell no, I'm not going to let you get away with this, right? So I gave it back. And so I think that for them, it was surprising that here is a progressive Muslim woman really sticking up for Islam and not looking Muslim, right? So it messed with their mind, but they were very appreciative, and they reached out, and it was very sweet. So I've had many positive experiences of at the end of the day, Shahada, and all who are listening to this, is that your ikhlas and your intention will come through. And I think that is such a beautiful core of what Islam is, your sincerity. And I think for us women, maybe we have an intuition when someone is BSing. It's like, no, there's something not right about this. I think men operate in a different plateau, and then women have more of this this intuition thing going on. I think they're more in touch with that intuition than men are. And I think that's probably why a lot of this misogynistic religious leaders really do attract a lot of men. I mean, if you look at Pakistan and how you have the religious leaders, railing for the death of someone in the name of blasphemy or in the name of defending Islam, it's just like, Prophet Muhammad, God bless him, doesn't need defending. God doesn't need defending. Islam doesn't need defending, and it comes from an insecurity. And insecurity comes from the male ego, from an ego, not just male. Women they're insecure women too. So ego is really the opposition to the spiritual connectedness to God. And I think that these religious leaders, I dare say that there's that missing element of love and compassion, and you can only get that love and compassion when you are really connected with the God in you. And like the verse say, God is closer to you than your jugular vein, right? And then there's a hadith that said, Prophet Muhammad said that to know yourself is to know God. So if you put those two things together, that surah, the Quran, and that hadith, that sort of nails it. And so your role, your duty is to pray, to meditate, and to connect with the God in you. And let's talk about meditation for a second. So when Prophet Muhammad received his first revelation, what was he doing? He was meditating. Okay, what does that do? That is looking inward, connecting with the God in you. So that's what's missing. Is our prayer is all about show, is all about outward, the God there facing Mecca, this cube. I don't get that.
And that's the beauty. I'm going to get Makanda in here. I'm going to allow him to speak. Yes. Because we had we've had discussions about the commonality of Hinduism and Islam, and there is so much commonality, and it's about looking in. It's that love. Makanda, yes. You've been listening in, so what's your feedback? What have you come out from this discussion?
No, I absolutely, I love the discussion, but I tend to be like a semi-textualist. I want to find the origins of these ideas within a tradition. So, I mean, one of the things I want to ask you, Mom, is, so, you know, you're talking about equality and the Quran, but one of the things that pops up to me that seems to be somewhat contradictory here would be like, well, we have these lists of prophets, but every prophet's a man. I mean, where is a woman in this dialogue that we have evidence within the Quranic tradition itself? We'll take the hadith aside, that would give credence to kind of the position you're taking, or are we taking a more like evolutionary perspective that the message of the Quran, the spirit of the Quran, is pushing us towards more inclusion over time? You know, if
Yeah.
do you understand my question here?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of both. It's, for example, Miriam, who gave birth to Jesus. For some Muslims, they look at her as being a prophet, a messenger of God, right? And then there's that, and then the concept is that, well, you know, if you're going to change a society, you're going to have to appoint someone from their own creed. And if that society is very tribal and very patriarchal, then obviously you're going to appoint a man. And I think that has a lot to do with that particular construct. And I think that is, to some degree, for example, like when I see that in my work in the 21st century, right? If I want a real change in a particular society, and I will partner with a male religious leaders leaders who are affirming of women and human rights, and I will sit in the background happily so, because for me it's not about my face, it's not about Ani Zonneveld even, or it's about MPV. It's about how can we lift up people? That's it. And how we get there, there's all different angles of getting there. And so I'm very strategic in the way I work. And I think in this case, God is probably more strategic than Ani Zonneveld. So that's probably, that's how I can rationalize it. But, you know, I'm not God, so it is what it is. So I can only use that as an example, if anything, in the way I work and how I strategize in doing the work that I do. Yeah.
And how
And what
have
do you think?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Let me
No,
add
you go.
something else. Let me add something else. You know, and along the same lines, but also along the lines of love and compassion that we talked about earlier. So what we've done is in Burundi, we partnered with our local imams there, and we developed a curriculum that is rooted in human rights for Burundi. And the Mufti of Burundi, who's just recently retired, basically, you know, wrote the foreword, and his position was like, unless the madrasas in Burundi use this curriculum, they will not be recognized by his office. So that's sort of like the use of male authority in a positive way, right? And what I've done here in the United States, in partnership with a colleague of mine who's an early child education expert, is we've developed a curriculum. It's called Inclusive Islam Curriculum Rooted in Human Rights for children ages 4 to 7. But, you know, even adults will get something out of it. And so this is going back to the idea that where is that love and compassion in Islam? And because they're not teaching it in the Islamic schools in the West even, right? And that's why we have such a disconnect between you know, Muslims in the West and Islam. Forget the Muslim world. Let's talk about our society even, right? And so it's about inculcating love and compassion in children, and how it is their responsibility as a Muslim to be human rights advocates, because you can't really be a Muslim, a real Muslim, if you are fine with human rights abuses and dehumanizing others, hate, etc., etc. That's not what Islam is about. So this curriculum is really going to the roots of it and inculcating that culture from a young age. And inshallah, 10 years from now or 15 years from now, we'll have a generation of Muslims that will be more, well, more Islam.
So, Imam, let me ask you this one also. So you're from Southeast Asia, right? You said, was it Malaysia? Correct?
Malaysia.
Yeah, right. So until the past like 20 some years, or maybe 25, maybe 30 years, the Islam in Southeast Asia has been really diverse in terms of its interaction with like Buddhists, Hindus, because it had to grapple with that kind of very multicultural society for most of its history, right? Because Islam is a recent entrant into that entire world there. So my question is, do you think a lot of your more liberal, inclusive values come from the culture that you come from in Malaysia, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, as opposed to if you were born in like a more Middle Eastern context? Would your ideas and values be shifted because of that nature? And is it tempered by the multiplicity and diversity that is existent in Malaysia that's not existed in the Middle East in that sense?
Yeah. I think so too, but I think it has a lot to do with my parents as well. Even though, I was born in Malaysia, but a lot of my life, most impressionable 8 years of my life, I lived abroad. So from about 2 years old to almost 17, I lived in Germany, Egypt, and India. And so with that exposure, and also with the diversity of culture and religions in Malaysia, it was at a young age, it's obviously, we're all not the same. And I'll share one particular story. When I was in Germany, I went to the British school there at a young age, and every morning we would be assembled we had assembly, and we would pray to Jesus. And so after a few mornings, I went home and I was like, well, what do I do with this, right? So I told my mom, and we prayed to Jesus. And so she said, don't worry, just substitute Jesus with Allah and you're all good. We're all praised to the same God in our different ways. And that for me really shaped who I am. And there was no utterance of hate towards the situation I was put in. My parents didn't take me out, which I am sure a lot of parents in the UK would have done at this moment. Maybe not 25 years, 30 years ago, but now, yes, they would. Same here in the United States. And they didn't say anything negative about the other religion. And I have never heard them say anything hateful about the other, whoever the other is, whether it be another religion, another culture, sexuality, color, never. And I can't say that is the case with some of my other Malaysian friends, right? So I think my parents had a lot to do with that as well. Yeah, and I'm very lucky for that. And they also didn't raise me on hadith. And they raised me on principles, on their values. So, my father was an ambassador, so we had a very comfortable lifestyle. And my kitty is here, and she's not feeling very well. So, and so, for example, when I was in Egypt, for example, we went and visited the Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon. And for him to say, look, this is a different situation that you should know and be exposed to, compared to our privileged upbringing and lifestyle, right? And so we went to the Port Said city, which was just concluded after the Arab-Israel war and the destruction of that city. So I was exposed to a lot. And in India, driving to school, I saw the mud houses and young children, walking around naked. So there was the privileged and the disprivileged, and so I've always been very conscientious of the world in that regard. So I'm not easily impressed by rich people. I'm not easily impressed by politicians or celebrities. They don't do anything for me. I am more impressed by how you treat another human being, especially someone who is underprivileged. That is how I judge someone, and that is how I garner the calibrate my respect or disrespect for someone, by the character.
Absolutely.
Oh, your love and compassion's really, it really has come through. And I've said to a lot of my friends, come and watch this interview for that. And you can really sense that Asa Mukunda can also feel that love and compassion, and reminds us to us all. And, we are at a crossroads now. I don't know if you feel like we are. We know more people like you, more people to watch this and feel inspired by you. And that's how we can live in a more harmonious, cohesive society, is people like you. And I just want to say, thank you from the bottom of my heart, because, I felt the love, and I hope people watching this can feel that, irrespective of your faith. And that's what, society is about. And thank you for taking the time. I know you're very, very busy and you're doing work in the UN, and, you always take time for us, and just to say thank you. And it's very much appreciated, and you're just radiating love, and thank you so much.
Thank you. No, I think as a last word, I would say that don't be afraid to own your Islam. And especially if it's rooted in social justice and human rights, own it. Don't let someone, don't let anyone belittle you on these values. These are really important values, social justice. I mean, that is kind of like one of the verses of the Quran is to speak up for justice, even if it is to your own to your own disadvantage, right? Speak up against your forefathers traditions, your father, the Quran is telling you to do that. So own it, and speak up for human rights. That is at the core of it. Love and compassion comes from human rights. And Islam, if it's really a religion of peace, well, what is peace? Peace cannot come without justice. And so what is justice? So, it is all rooted in love and compassion, and the just in how you treat the other. And that's the only way you can have peace.
Thank you so much. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.